Hemos comenzado la grabación y la retransmisión en Facebook en este instante. Pueden comenzar cuando quieran. Gracias.
Perfecto, veo a Carlos Miranda. ¿Cómo estás, Carlos?
Hola, Jamadier, ¿cómo están? Súper bien, ¿y tú?
Bien, qué gusto. Si nos dan unos segundos más. A ver, estamos esperando a Ariel.
Carl,
Pero-
if you could please add me to the interpretation booth for English and Spanish. And I think Isabel also is missing.
Bien, yo creo que partimos, dado que ha llegado la hora que estaba programada. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Muchas gracias a los que están acá, y también sé que va a haber mucha gente que después ve esto en la retransmisión, así que también un saludo afectuoso a todos ellos y a todas ellas. Vamos a comenzar con una provocación hacia los panelistas. Todos
We're going to start with a question or prompt for the panelists who are prominent intellectuals. And after that, we're going to present ourselves and listen to their presentations. If we have time, we might have an interaction with the public, with those who are here.
La educación y la escuela son medios de reproducción social. Aparatos, les decía el marxismo estructuralista francés. Y como tal reflejan
Schools are methods for social reproduction that defend the hegemony. A structured state that imposes a consensus. Like all instances within the state, it has a practical consequence with limited access that leaves space for conflict that isn't inherent to humanity, but that always comes into play when the modes of production are at risk or being disputed. And that space of dispute, this space of dispute is the prompt or the idea behind the opening of this space. It's not the same as indigenous education, which is or an ancestral practice used by different peoples. This creates an emphasis on education as a tool. We have a question about the role of schools in the state project. And in what project indigenous peoples and communities are part of. Without denying the importance for Latin America and the wars for emancipation, which are denied by liberal historians and by orthodox Marxist historians, internal colonialism, which was theorized by Casanova, are colonialisms of the state. During the Spanish colonialism, Mapuches had their autonomy other indigenous communities also had their independence. Chile's constructed itself as a nation state that relegated indigenous communities and which defeated the Mapuche people in the 19th century. This national project is connected to the national school. The creation of higher education in Chile brought a lot of benefits to communities, but were part of this internal colonialism project. It didn't have sensibility towards the communities of the territories. It wasn't the fault of this school, but of the project of the state. The Chilean state rebels against colonialism, but also inaugurates a colonial project locally. At the beginning of the 19th century, there's an effort to create a secular state, and which uses the theory of modernity, which has consequences for the indigenous state, and goes against the spiritual practices of ancestral peoples, and goes against the religious expressions of different peoples in Chile. There's another side of the modernization of Chile. In the global north, in the metropolis, there's a dispute between the state and the church, which is liberating, but not in the global south, not for indigenous people, where the Christian practice, which I am part of, has other aspects. Why? Because in the global north, in the metropolis of North America, the dispute between the state and the church is political, but that dispute from modernity has a theology which isn't mentioned, which is atheism. When that atheism is imposed on the global south and indigenous people, it suppresses local theologies. In the 80s, when there's a large revolt or a indigenous uprising, the indigenous issues are brought to the public agenda, not back to life, but to the public agenda. These indigenous people create conflicts with the Chilean state. They take lands, claiming lands which had been stolen by the Chilean state. A series of organizations, and there's a series of actions to make claims and demands which echo to nowadays. This is when the Chilean state starts to participate in institutions that deal with indigenous issues. And this is a practice of conquest of the people, which happens within the Chilean states that recognizes and at the same time conquests people. Yes, it was a victory of the indigenous people, but on the other hand, it suppressed the key issues, which were land, minerals, water. In the name of a secular productivism, people were dispossessed. We speak of an encounter or a conflict. We speak of strength, which try to integrate under multicultural neoliberalism, others which try to construct the autonomy of the people. We see projects that try to visibilize what generations have fought for, but also people that don't work with them, but against them. In the practical professional work of our guests, they have worked very closely with indigenous communities. Today we have Ariel León, Carlos Miranda, which for some reason is appearing on the flyer with a different name, and Belén Moltabla. I would propose that Belén starts. Each person is going to have around 10 minutes to give their presentation. Thank you, Jamadier. Thank you to Helen and Carlos. My name is Ariel León Bacial. My ethnic background is Aymara Quechua and Mami Ñara. We're from a land with a lot of exploitation of minerals and resources which create conflicts for the indigenous people. Particularly for the Aymara Quechua people. This is an indigenous group of the entire country, and among other things, we have fought against the law of Monsanto, the auction of waters of Queco, and various different struggles. After 20 years of a lot of collaboration and support with all of the indigenous people of Chile, I can say that the best thing that you can do is to give yourself to your struggles and to your territories. Particularly for those who were able to participate in universities and public institutions. I was part of the Senate, and that's where I carried out many of those struggles. And especially those people who grew up in cities but that have an indigenous background, we have to give ourselves to the territories. Territories have their own wisdom. To say it in good Spanish, each person knows where their shoes are. And the wisdom of the territories can't be denied. There's two topics I want to speak about. The communities of Taparacaca, who are Quechua, spoke about the consequences of the schooling system. The Quechua children were being forced to learn the Aymara language. These are different languages, and they do have cultural connections, but they aren't the same people. They have different cultural practices and different tongues, different languages. And when we knew about this, we felt indignant. So we presented a legal case. In Chile, like in other In other Latin American countries, the rights of indigenous people aren't completely respected. With the Quechua children, with their case, we're taking it to the Inter-American Court. After disputing with different institutions and courts, particularly with the actors within the region of Tapacá in the north of Chile, what we found was that the educational system is a bureaucratic machine which has inertia and doesn't really understand anything about the indigenous people. After the indigenous consultation, there is an intercultural educational system, but they don't know it. They don't know international treaties. They don't know the Convention of the Rights for the Child. They don't know the general aspects of that convention, and that it's not applied. And much less than the Chilean law, which was created in Chile. And they don't know how to respond to the accusations of cultural assimilation and ethnic genocide. I've spoken with Jamadier about this, who is my friend and who I admire intellectually. It's one of the few people that I admire intellectually. He's a psychologist, and he analyzed the case and gave an expert opinion. Speaking to the alienation that comes from being forced to learn the language of another people. This can lead to suicidal activities. Jamadier carried out a psychological research. I know what giving an expert opinion is, and I think he did an excellent job. The Chilean justice system did not respond to this case. So now we're going to the Inter-American Court against the Chilean state because we need justice in this case, and the legal system of Chile has failed to protect the cultural diversity. Its obligation to protect cultural diversity and the psychological well-being of children. The other case is of a community in the third region at the north of Chile. This Andean community has copper, lithium, and gold. There's people from New Zealand, from Australia, from China, and there's serious violations of human rights, and including death threats to the community. There are children, Poya children, from the Poya people in the mountains here. They are connected with nature, they use their customs, they're connected, and they know the value of their knowledge and their practices. Sacred science is practiced there, and that makes me so happy to know that communities like this community are practicing this, not Western science. At 6 or 5 years old, they're kidnapped and made to go to schools which are practically jails, and they're given orders like put your hands up, put your hands to the side, eat, stop eating. they're kidnapped in these schools. They sit for 10 years, something which is completely inhumane, and this has psychological effects, serious psychological effects, because they're removed forcibly from their territories and communities. How is it possible that the educational system can take teachers in a territory that has lithium, that has mining? They can't even take teachers to give classes within the communities. Again, a legal case, again, the Inter-American Court. With these two cases, I want to speak about a crisis in Chile that is coming to a limit, which is a crisis of the social uprising. This is a different type of crisis that has to do with the extinction of entire peoples, that has to do with a genocidal educational system that goes against human rights, that creates traumas, that creates pathologies that have been completely identified by expert opinions against children. Those of us that are older are a result of this. With the parents of the Koya community, we say they already screwed us over, but let's protect the children. This shows the crisis of a model. The model is in crisis. This model of appealing only to interculturalism has failed. This model which says, let's teach the entire class in Spanish, in Chilean, and one small condiment of indigenous language, and that this is named as indigenous education, that it passes as indigenous education, is crazy. It's not logical. What should be coming is a new beginning. Yes, there should be interculturalism. Chilean children should know the indigenous people, and indigenous people should know Chilean children. Nobody is denying that there should be a connection between people. But self-determination should be the principle that is most important. That means that we should have our own educational system, our own schools, because we all know what the origin of the Western school is, which is a factory of workers. And that is why they have, that's why they have bells, that's why they have uniforms, that's why they have inhuman hours at school. And like Felipe Quifes has said, and I always quote this, I don't want my daughter to be the nanny of someone else. We don't want an educational system that is functional to the state, to international companies, to multinational companies. We want an educational system that is functional to our people, where we decide what the curriculum is, where we decide what is taught. This isn't a struggle against them. We're not speaking against them. It's to change the orientation of the
system. Porque justamente lo que hace el sistema actualmente está orientado no a nosotros, no a nuestra supervivencia, está orientado a la supervivencia.
Because the system is now focused on the surviving for the extractivism, the grand economic system, the main capital, but not us. I think I have complied with the 10 minutes. Let me know. Yes, we are on time. Okay, yes, this, and thank you for the opportunity, really. Thank you to Jamadier, thank you to your presence. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I just say the name of the speakers, but I didn't introduce them clearly. Sorry really for not given your background. He is a lawyer. We have worked together and work in many struggles. He is also leading the impugnation at the Constitutional Court of the PPT 11. So we hope that this struggle, that this struggle that is so important for the community, for the country, we expect it to be successful. But anyway, if not, it's a very good struggle, a very good fight. So now I will introduce Maria Belén Montalva. She is educator from Parvulos. She's children teacher. I met her some years ago when she was starting in the north with the Koyas community in the bilingual intercultural teaching. And I have had a very amazing experience to participate in the children institution that she leads, that has a lot of complexity because there is indigenous education and education for the indigenous people. So here I want to keep that differentiation in the ancient territories, but there is also space for linking, converging, and merging these different cultures, as the case in the 5th region, where Belén, on my opinion, is leading a very passionate work, and I would like to listen to her. So I give to you the floor, Belén.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Jamadier.
Thank you so much, Jamadier. Feel very proud to have you as moderator of this talk. I also want to share Ariel's words to really tell you our big admiration and feeling proud of you, of your work, because when things are very difficult, you are there. I'm so emotional and compassionate for what Ariel has just explained. I'm so sorry, but I'm also feel hope because of the situation that many girls and boys are living in the Koya communities. As Jamadier said, some years ago, I was sent by the Chilean government with a whole policy vision as a state project in the government of Michelle Bachelet, where for the first time in Chile, based on the 169 agreement, start with intercultural education. And I was sent to the 3rd region with the indigenous people to collaborate and build intercultural curriculums. That was the title for the preschool children and the education community. At the time, it was 2008, if I'm not wrong. First, it was something new, and the intercultural education, there was not a lot of information, theoretical background that could support this work. Even worse in Chile, and even worse about the Koya indigenous people. So many years has elapsed, and here we are, 2 speakers talking about the Koya community, because Chile really didn't recognize this community, mainly because of the language, but nowadays we
Digo que... Ahí sí. Gracias.
Okay, back. Okay, so I feel so proud to be here and to talk about the Koya indigenous people. So at the time I had to study, of course, and at the same time to meet those people or those that had the knowledge or can give me the opinion about the Koya community. So I was so lucky, and maybe life gave me this opportunity. So I met Zoilo Jerónimo Escalante, who is Yatiri from Koya people, and it's recognized as, as something important live from this community, with an amazing view of the Koya people, and especially humanity and childhood, that really it's amazing reference. And there he in a park with his backpack, he was listening to me, to my whole wording about what I'm doing. And he said, I feel it's amazing. It's very beautiful what you are saying, but I don't conceive the intercultural education or indigenous education within 4 concrete walls. That's impossible. Why? Why? As Ariel mentioned, because boys and girls learn from the nature, from the rocks, from the wind, from the flowers, from the animals surrounding them. That's, and the earth mother, that's what mobilize with several different, but that's really the root of our indigenous people. So I thought, oh, he's breaking down on my proposal, but he say, okay, we will do our best to conquer, and that's why I'm it's really amazing to hear Ariel, to see his work, his concession, because this is what I have lived during the last 13 years. So there we start with a very, very rich work with him. He was, in addition to be representative of the Koya people, it's a people that also was able to collect several cultural elements and connection with different other indigenous communities, since Paraguay, Guatemala, people that walk along the Andean path. So Solo has a very wide vision of what is to be an indigenous person. He says that many people even has in the background, non-indigenous people has a background or a light and a knowledge to share with the indigenous people, because with those that we really didn't consider, that we just put apart, like something that is there, but we never give them the proper value. So this is a political fight. So I feel based on my own beliefs to fight for the indigenous fight, because can represent not just the indigenous people, but also non-indigenous people, not those, but to recover for those who had not were not lucky, or we were as the product of this alienate system that could live and enrich, that we could be able to enrich and grow through our roots, or I don't say roots, but our background, our Asians. So in that sense, we start to develop and discuss, and we, in a moment, we say that interculturality is false, because it says a link, an equity link between different communities or people. So, but there's no equality in Chile, so it cannot be an interculturality because of this, not just a difference of power, rights hand and right political approach, but also a speech that also benefit a government that wants to reposition the indigenous people. But we are on this two phases approach, because it can be even for the worst, and you never know who you work for, and there we can lose many things. So here we have the concept of talking about the education for cultural diversity, to promote this, to have in this space, in this convergence and divergence space, to appear different cultural reality, and we can speak and talk about a dialogue, a discussion, and from a critical multilingualism that can promote the discussion on the difference between power and right among these among these different cultures. So after this whole work in the north of Chile, I need to say that then I decided to get out of the system, because then with Piñera, well, in addition to not recognizing this good intention of the state for the originals, for the indigenous people, they were even using very bad the concept of interculturality. So it was personally and from my own belief, political belief and proper belief, it was very complex. Jamadier knows me, I am children teacher and I have a PhD and master in education. So when I came back, I tried to share because as Zoilo taught me, we always take a backpack, and in this backpack we have mysteries, we have experience, but we need to share this backpack. So I feel like that I have here a backpack to share, and working with children, I have worked with different preschool children, and I have shared, and I'm sharing with them this backpack, this knowledge. And that's why I am now in the urban context, in the non-indigenous context, non-territory space of indigenous people with not a high percentage of indigenous children. However, when you put or explain or share this topic in educational spaces, a whole wave is generated. It's what I call a reculturalization, not rescue. So experiences, grandparents, grandfathers, grandmothers start to share their knowledge, and people start to identify themselves. And there I want to propose the discussion of what is being indigenous. That has been very complex regarding the definition of the CONAI, or who is not indigenous. But this is a really complex discussion. So in addition, or more far than the definition of the CONAI of who is or who is not indigenous, people start to identify with knowledge, with ancient knowledge. And they say, well, I don't know if it's I'm Mapuche, Koya, but I remember that my grandparents used to do this. So it starts to appear this different knowledge, and people starts to feel represented by this work. I want to add that within this context and within this side, within this space, the boys and girls, I work with children from 6 months to 4 years old. It's really, really small children. So for them, the indigenous education or the education of indigenous people is something very spontaneous. So for them, it's not very hard to talk with the sun. They can talk with the plants, with the insect, with the animals. So they have this opening that we all have lost, the adults have lost, to understand the Earth Mother as something that we have inside ourselves. So there is a very spontaneous way to act, way to behave of the children, that because they connect with ancient knowledge or natural knowledge or Earth Mother knowledge. So they connect very well with that. So for me, this is also a must to put available this knowledge. So also based on that, I can work or have the opportunity to work with the indigenous people. I have received a lot of knowledge and a lot of motivation from the indigenous, but however, I'm not an indigenous. So I require that those that have the knowledge and the spirit knowledge, they can be actors of this. And this is a fight. Oh, sorry, I am on time. Just to close, because I'm out of time, I think. I just want to, I think we will have a later discussion, but just to mention this, the conflict, contradictions, and the tensions versus good intentions. So I would like to discuss and talk about this convergence and divergence of those good and bad intentions of us that works in these educational spaces. Thank you so much. Sorry, Belen, and sorry for the for such short period of time. That's the symposium format, but it was a pleasure to hear you regarding the childhood work that you have. So now we give the floor to Carlos Miranda Carvajal. He is professor or Ubica Altai. He is expert in educational assessment. He has worked within the schools as consultant and currently as academic. We share with him a lot of things, even the same PhD program that we are studying right now. And in addition, we are members or are part of this tree that has grown a lot regarding the decolonial approach within the academic area. So Carlos, to you the floor. So we have 10 to 12 minutes, and then we will have a discussion. I'm so proud, a descendant of the Toroku family, and my ancient from Toconawe, as well as some of the Chau that are here. Welcome. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to share with you this journey. We have worked in a very informal settings, but not in such in a setting like this with Maria Belén many years ago when I was a apprenticeship of methodology. So it's really a pleasure, Ariel. I have heard about you, but I didn't have the pleasure to meet you. So I am going to show part of my work that is really related to the convergence and divergence, because the approach of my research is this institutional relation between family and a school. This is something that I observe first as a teacher. Why? Because being part of the Oligantai indigenous people, I didn't have this transit that many people ask, how did you recognize yourself as an indigenous? No, I didn't recognize myself as an indigenous. I am indigenous. I have lived as an indigenous. I work in the channels cleaning. I live in the horse areas. So I grew as an indigenous. There was no other knowledge. So we have lived with this knowledge in a urban territory, but live in an indigenous life. So this knowledge has developed since the school. What the international institution proposed that they close that in a standard area, educational standard context, and say, yes, the family is very important at home, and the school is very important also. But why? For the outcomes. But what kind of families do we have in Chile? So to get out of the standards, and first, what is the indigenous family? When we review the indigenous law, we see that there's nothing at all defining an indigenous family. And this is something very important, because we say, or we follow the French epistemology that says the family is a collaborator of the state that needs to support the formation processes of the nation. But what is the indigenous family? What is not a family that support and would like to create a nation? We have different features. So finally, we arrived to this question: what does a school and formal education means for the indigenous family, and what is the indigenous family? So this is a very common concept, but really maybe it looks so here so despective, but it is very close to the hippism. We are a EU, but what does it mean? So when we go with the Pichao community, with Pablo's family, when a real EU, and say, what does a family means for you? And they say, yes, it's a composition, it's a family organization. that has a blood connection and not blood link, that we are based in the trust that we have built, and we take care and have an ancient knowledge that came from our ancient, from our grandparents. So we have a different value, a value different from that what is given to the state, to the old people. What do we do with the Asian people? What does the government gives to the Asian? To give a very bad pension, to eat whatever they want, and to die wherever they want or however they want. So what is the value of the ancient people? What is the role they play?
This man who has a model of education that isn't from the academy or formal, but that is a model of education that teaches us a lot. What happens with the study of the Andes, the perfection of the creation of terraces, which permits the survival of humans in extreme conditions. There is indigenous science. Of course, there is indigenous and ancestral knowledge. What has been studied in this? Very little. The shadows of the state have to be forgotten to say that this is done. After the dictatorship, there is an intercultural and bilingual educational system, which is key to have the vote of the Mapuche people and to remove the dictator. And this dictates that all schools, every school that has 20% of indigenous population, it has to have an intercultural system. It has to be self-financed, that had to include an educator from the indigenous community. So what happened with this? From the perspective of linguistic, that project is a failure because it's not from the US. Spanish is taught, and Aymara and other languages are used in our intimate life. Ariel spoke in Quechua, and which of us understood that? It's not bilingual. There's an image of indigenous people that is imposed, especially from the hippie perspective, a concept of something that is pachamamico. That concept doesn't exist. That concept doesn't exist, but hippie people say, I believe in the land, but that doesn't exist. The project fails because it's not bilingual. Piñera proposes a class which is indigenous language. We participated in the plans, in the projects, in the resources, in the human resources, in the financial resources. So after the promise that this would be universal for all the children of Chile, there's a section that says that to be able to give this class, there has to be a 20% population of indigenous people. So they tricked us. They lied to us. The school continues to be the main tool used to colonize indigenous peoples. Andean peoples can say the image of our Mother Earth that takes care of us is used to evangelize us. The school continues to be a space that uses biopolitics, that is hegemonic, that goes against others. Once a student, once an indigenous student tells me it's like a jail. They tell us what to do. He was taken from his community to a school of concentration where he was hid, where he was prohibited from carrying out his social economic activities like shepherding, where an economic model was imposed, which is completely connected to colonialism, where progress is connected to economic advances and not local progress. When I take a child and dispossess that child of their community, of their knowledge, to put them in a border school, and this creates breaks in the identity. It breaks the identity. There are indigenous people whose mothers told them, don't say that you are indigenous. Don't say it. And why? Why does that negation exist? I want to talk about the fact that all of this and many other elements shows us that there is a need to elevate new epistemologies that can serve to construct something. The concept of decolonialism isn't to erase everything. It's to take the tools, the colonial tools of the academy, to create our own epistemologies, to create a tool that would allow us to show that our knowledge is valid and valuable, that can show that we are people that have the same value as others. I'm open to the discussion. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for that life testimony and that wonderful work that you have done in the research that you have done. We would have 10-15 minutes to have a discussion if there are questions. I also want to talk about the details of something that doesn't only represent me, but also the sensibilities that are here. When we speak about the limits of the current educational model and the model of the state that this educational system is a part of, thank you for that concept, Carlos. We're not, when we criticize this, nobody here is apologizing or we're not accepting the idea that people would create communities that are isolated in the forest. We also know that the state is not enough, but perhaps the state is needed. Communities are not enough, but without the communities, we can't do it. If someone wants to think about this, I'll use the concept of a hippie, an educational hippieism, which is intercultural, which is at the margin of the communities and excludes the possibility of communities creating their own models. Those communities need to be more present, not to be isolated, not to live in a way that is concentrated only on a history that continues to occur, but rather to make interculturalism a reality. I want to thank the participation of Ariel, of Belén, of Carlos, which it teaches me a lot. Here we have 3 peoples from the north. I'm here as part of the south, and seeing the knowledge of these people has been very emotional and exciting for me. If there are questions, please open up your mics. We can take at least 10 minutes to be able to answer those questions.
Jamadier, disculpa.
Jamadier, sorry.
Sí, no, mira, quería por tu intermedio preguntarle a Carlos si la
I
familia
want to ask
Esteban Araya y la hermana Herminia.
Carlos if his family is from the line of the banda. I know your family.
De hecho, la demanda que paralizó la licitación del litio en el salar de Maricunga fue
We've
suscrita por el hermano Esteban.
carried out struggles together.
Así que guardo una relación de
I have a relationship of respect and honor with your family, so it's a pleasure to be able to get to know you. I hope that we can remain in contact. It was very interesting to hear you. Thank you, Ariel. I don't know if the guests here, the participants, have questions. Good afternoon. I have a question for Carlos Miranda. Professor Miranda, I would like to ask what you think the role of the school was in annexing territories
tomar un sujeto, llevarlo a un espacio disciplinario
taking children, placing them in a disciplinary space, imposing values, a space which wasn't within the borders of the Chilean state. Hi, Miguel. There's clear evidence of this. If we look at the classic texts about this, about the importance of the family at the social level, the police of the family shows us that the family is an organization that serves to support the state in the territory. So what happens with schools in territories, it's a matter of looking at the name of the schools. In the modern cities of Chile, there were schools. There was a school named the border town of concentration in Toconao. This territory was annexed to Chile after the Pacific War. So the role of the school was to make the students Chilean. That was always the role. There was a forceful assimilation and extermination of the population. The third process of assimilation went through the imposition of Catholicism and the Spanish language. So the school was the tool to annex and make Chilean people who were part of other nations, And this occurs even with the borders of other countries. In Alicana possesses part of the territory of Bolivia, or territories that are part of Bolivia or Peru, and that was the role of the school. Nowadays in Chile, the school still has that role. The role of the school is to globalize Chileans. When we became part of the world as a quote unquote developed country, we have indicators that in terms of development that are not very high. Our country is plurinational. There are multiple nations and languages and ways of life here. I hope that I answered your question.
Muchas gracias, Carlos. Tenemos una palabra pedida de Libertad Manque.
Libertad Manque is raising her hand. Please go ahead.
¿Me escuchan?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Un saludo a todos, buenos días.
A greeting to all of you. Good morning. Carlos, I would like to ask you a question. Not a question, but a comment. But I've made it before, but it's important for the rest of the participants to reflect on. You're saying that I didn't have to reckon myself as indigenous because I am indigenous. Yes, that's true because you come from the territory. But there's a lot of us that are second, third, fourth generation, like my case, or other Mapuches in the city. And it was our parents or grandparents that decided or that told us, that said, don't say your name, don't dress like this, don't speak the language. We're a product of silence. We were removed from history because we weren't those that came from the South. We're the ones that were born here, that were already born here in the city. So I want us to reflect on this in the symposium or some other. The Huarachis need to be recognized. Those Mapuches that were born in the city, the Aymara that were born here, other indigenous people who were born here in the city. We have had to live through a very difficult process to be able to recognize ourselves and even recover our ways of dressing and to live our culture. Yes, there is a process of recognizing ourselves, and it's very important that we talk about it as well. And we understand those indigenous people that came from rural areas, from the communities, but those of us that are a mix of the rural areas, of cement, of the city, of the earth, it's difficult. So I would leave that example for us to reflect on, because there's a lot of us in the city. I speak in prisons with my brother that is a political prisoner in the Valparaíso prison. We're using a trade to try to get him to come back, but it's very difficult because we don't have those strong roots. Thank you, Libertad. And those processes are open and will be open for a long time, that thinking about the family history, those transgenerational traumas are completely present, and thinking about that as a historical element is important. There's one last question, because we're a little bit past the time, but I don't want to not answer it. He says, Carlos spoke about developing our own epistemologies. With this, what is the role of the academy, of the counter-hegemonic academy in this process, in the areas of research and methodologies? Is there an example or reference that you could speak about? I am Chaltumay. If any of you can answer this briefly in no more than 2 minutes.
María Belén, no sé si tú quieres. Ah, ya,
O el,
adelante,
o el mismo
Carlos.
orden, no sé, como quieran.
No, adelante, Carlos. Adelante,
Ya.
María.
Ya, mira, hay un tema súper importante que tiene que ver con la emergencia
There's
epistemológica.
something very important which has to do with the epistemological emergence, because the academy promotes, we spoke with people from the Aymara people and other indigenous people. When one is a teacher, you have to teach something that isn't your own, but that you've been told to taught. So we spoke about the fact that when you think about these theses of decolonization as a goal or a common goal, we have to have a process, a logical process within the academy. We have to make that decolonial criticism. We can be very indigenous, but we're part of this production of conferences, of classes, of doing. And giving a decolonial criticism allows us to see that epistemology that is imposed through philosophy, sociology, psychology, is an epistemology that isn't a part of our beliefs or what we are. We shouldn't speak of progress, but of living well. That is our first epistemology that came from what we are. When vivir or living well comes from the Aymara people. Speaking of something that is closer to me, this principle of reciprocity, of parity, of this relationship that gives us a reason to live and a reason to consider the earth as a mother and consider ourselves as part of the earth. So that's where we realize that this proposal of being inconformist of time and of history shows us that each of us has knowledge that has to be raised up through that decolonial methodology, which is using the tools of the academy in a spiral which installs the concept of buen vivir or living well, and creating that otherness within the academy.
María Belén.
Ahí sí, sí. Bueno, Manuel,
Bien.
alguna vez también.
Manuel, I have once heard you, and I felt also aiming to mention and state something, but just to add, because I'm working, I'm in the context and the praxis, but I think the knowledge, the indigenous epistemology are lived, not learned academically. I have had to learn a lot from my ignorance, but what I have learned and the way I have been able to discuss and put in practice the epistemology is by living, by experiencing. I think that's the knowledge that we can read a lot about indigenous people, but if we do not live, or students, boys and girls cannot live, there's no insight. I'm trying, and have many years trying to form a curriculum. But I think that this is built. I keep building, and I fail, and then I assemble it again and rebuild it again. But I do it with the indigenous knowledge that support me. But without resources, I have no resources. My institution have no resources for intercultural education. It's all your management. It's all you, the love we have. It's the way we fight from this side. Just to add that this is something that we are continuous building all the time. Thank you. Ariel, we close with you. Thank you. Briefly, I think that the most valuable of the three of us as speakers, humbling, I say, the diversity of our origin and the diversity of our experience. That's the most valuable thing of this discussion. In that sense, I completely understand Carlos when he says that when he mentioned the epistemology, the curriculum, the need to systematize and make this intellectual. But I also understand Maria Belén when she mentioned experience. From my perspective, based on my experience, many things come to my mind. First, there is a risk, and the risk is the limit, the extreme, the limit. So from one side, in the indigenous people, we are not just academic or political or completely political or completely academical institutions. We are more, and let me say in that way, there are spirit principles that govern the indigenous world that maybe, and many times this has been denied, and we do not find this indigenous spirit in the papers or in the academic literature. Without this indigenous element, the indigenous peoples, we are not indigenous. We are anything but indigenous. So everything starts there. That's the source. And that spirit element or spirit principle is transferred through ceremonies that are very important for us, that can be done just in specific areas that are sacred for us. So if these territories are destroyed or are removed from us or stolen, we completely lose the contact with the app, with this superior. So the indigenous system cannot be taken out of the context. All in the indigenous people where I go to and discuss, and I talk with them, and they will reaffirm this decision that everything comes from the spirit and then goes back to the earth. And secondly, there are words that we face on a daily basis. For example, patrimony, biodiversity, natural resources. And when you start to fight in these areas, you see that there are some words that have been invented and used for stealing. Biodiversity was invented to steal from us the natural areas, our natural resources. Biodiversity to steal the seeds and the bioplasma. So we have to change and reverse the meaning of the words to make it for the benefit of us. Do you remember Jamadier in 2012 in the Constitutional Court in using the biodiversity word that that's patrimony, to steal our remains, our immaterial heritage. So how can we separate, divide the territory from the oral tradition, from the spirituality? But they talk about the material and no material patrimony or assets. So I don't know how you can divide that, but they use that. And this is a word also that they use to steal. And what do you need to do? You have to use the word first, otherwise they do not understand, and reverse it, reverse the meaning in order to use it for our benefit. So the other word was, let me remember, natural resources, the same thing. For now is the pacha, the earth, natural resources. We ask an Aymara and they say, where do you live? Kamasa. If you ask a Quechua brother, where do you live? Misi. And if you ask, why do you live in the island? Mana. If you ask a Mapuche, Newen. That's where there is a life energy. When the spirit principles explode, there our indigenous people live. So when you want to defend a community from destruction of gold, lithium, etc., you have to use the natural resource word and then reverse the meaning to apply to your indigenous context. So let's pay attention to these words, epistemology, because curriculum, because they were not created for us. And we try to go inside property, indigenous property, curriculum, indigenous curriculum, everything with a last name, and sometimes very difficult. But indigenous, because indigenous people, we do not prepare or produce our knowledge. We have received directly, and we continue to receive it through the ceremony, through the just to call and to be strategic, to invite you to be strategic and use all of this speech, but in indigenous key, and it's because nor the law, nor the anthropology, nothing of that is done for us. Okay, thank you to all of you. As the promise was to have critical sharpness and a lot of coffee, and I think we have been able to comply these lines. So thank you so much. I really appreciate for your participation. Thanks for those that have made question and that have accepted this invitation to share in this amazing symposium. So if you have the opportunity to continue connecting to the other roundtables, please do it. And thank for the amazing trabajo of Silvia Redon that have given us the opportunity